Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just showed the world one of the best ways to reboot a video game. As a gamer who loved the original, I can tell you the reboot is nothing short of amazing. But what if more companies gave older games that kind of love and attention? Hey everyone, it's the Dove here to bring you 6 games that need the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lovin'. Let's start off with an easy one, Guitar Hero, a cultural phenomenon in the mid to late 2000s. The game combined video games with rhythm and a great rock and roll soundtrack. Before that, rhythm games were just hit your gamepad to the music. But with a controller that looked like a guitar, this rhythm game had an edge. The title got stale after the only changes to the games were the addition of more songs. It became the copy and paste affair that we see all too often with sports titles. There was a last-ditch effort to add a slide to the guitar, but most people were long gone by then. Besides the stale nature of the gameplay, it didn't actually feel like playing a guitar at all. So those who started the game and got the bug to try and learn the real thing, tried their hand at an actual guitar and found out quickly how different things actually were. I don't want to get hung up on those people too much, but I think I have an answer for all the staleness and the user remorse. Simply add a second row of buttons to the guitar. The challenge of the game will grow greatly and attract those who already mastered the original, while also getting close to some actual guitar mechanics for those who use the game as a gateway to the real thing. Now they do have Guitar Hero controls with 10 fret buttons, but I'm saying 2 rows of 5. The extra layer of buttons would emulate more accurately what guitar chords look and feel like, and give greater challenge during the songs. Trying to get a perfect score with 10 buttons to choose from at any time would ultimately force advanced players to really study some of the more difficult parts of songs. Along with that, the game needs to embrace all music, not just rock. Funk, jazz, rhythm, and blues all have amazing guitar. Open up the game to more music and you will attract more gamers. Make the controller more challenging and you will start another Guitar Hero revolution. One of my childhood favorites was Twisted Metal, a game that on the surface doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But remember in Mario Kart when instead of racing you picked battle because your older brother would always kick your ass, and that was the only way to be somewhat competitive? Well, Twisted Metal is the Adult Swim version of the Battle Mario Kart. It's a combat game with cars, which you don't race. You just shoot the crap out of each other. I can't believe they have not rebooted this series yet, especially with the show on Peacock. Twisted Metal has already seen a few updates and wannabe reboots, so there is a slightly better graphical version out there than the original. But this game needs a hard reboot and fast. I don't think anyone has ever picked Twisted Metal because of its close relationship with reality, so graphically, things just need to be updated to today's standards. Things could look anywhere from the latest updates to GTA 5, or something far more cartoonish. Either way, it is about the gameplay. The real challenge for games that use cars in combat is the aiming. It is extremely hard to aim at a target that is moving while you yourself are moving incredibly fast. No one likes auto-aim, but there has to be some sense of assisted aiming for these games to really shine. I think originally a lot of people didn't like these games because there was no assist aim. The original controls are also clunky to say the least. It feels like you're controlling a shopping cart rather than a car. My recommendation is to emulate the latest Armored Core game by From Software in both button configuration and aiming. For those who haven't enjoyed Armored Core 6 yet, this fast-paced game gets the heart pumping. You whiz around as a weaponized mech targeting other mechs. The speed of combat can feel insane at times, and thus there is plenty of auto-aim. Not all auto-aim shots land, so there is a lot of use for defensive movements. This could easily be adopted for a new Twisted Metal. The focus is more on damage and attack management than trying to have any Oakley-style aim. Along with that, a Twisted Metal reboot could allow players to build their own cars instead of choosing something that they have no attachments to. Instead of a roguelike single-player mode that doesn't seem to have a point, a player creating their own carriage of destruction and making their own story would be way more interesting than the over-the-top nonsense from the Twisted Metal universe. Ultimately, I think this game would be a lot of fun to reboot and give it a nice new coat of paint for this generation to try their hand at a little more in-depth car combat. The good news is this next series I bring up has had a whisper of a new iteration coming out soon. Just check out their most recent gameplay trailer that has no actual gameplay in it. Seriously, the name of the trailer is Fable Gameplay Trailer, but it just has actors talking and a few animated cutscenes. Regardless, I don't care if it is a real reboot or another installment, but Fable needs to come back to the public. Now, the gameplay is relatively good, but I think they need to stop reaching so much for the stars and focus on what they do best. I really enjoyed the stories and the choices and how they wove with each other. But one company that may have done the multiple endings better is Obsidian. The endings to their games give players a lot of reason to replay. I think the biggest area where I have trouble with Fable is how they try to have a Sims-like world with absolutely every single NPC in the world. I personally think they should focus their efforts more on the story arcs of some of the main characters, and how your character responds to those characters. Then you can have a great ending and more heartfelt stories like Obsidian does with their games. Combat-wise is where Fable is weakest. Fable should focus itself on a good, fast-paced combat system instead of the long, grueling affair of old. I think the latest God of War series had a great system with the weapon switching mid-combat. Fable could adopt a system much like that with the spells and attacks to give players the ability to wield a lot of different moves and spells while keeping the pace of combat up. Plain and simple, the fighting needs a serious jolt, and I think more intensity is needed. Not necessarily the violence of God of War, but the high-octane, devastating combos could shine with the myriad of spells in Fable. Giving the players the customization to bind whatever spells and effects allows players to open up combat. It also helps gamers fully immerse themselves in the role-playing element of the game. So, I really think the biggest issues to reboot Fable are just to make the combat way more fun and interesting, and leave some of that every NPC matters stuff to the curb, and focus on the characters that you actually interact with. This next one doesn't need too much explanation, but the crown jewel of Final Fantasy Saga is easily Final Fantasy VI, or if you played in the US in the 90s, Final Fantasy III. The number system got a little dicey early on in the series, as the developers in Japan didn't expect American audiences to like the games. They were very wrong. The differences from Final Fantasy VI to VII are vast. The stories are completely different, the gameplay is different, the character development is different, and the universe the game is set in is completely different. Regardless of the differences, a reboot of Final Fantasy VI would not have to look or play all that different from Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. A lot of the mechanics developing characters would have to change, but the combat and the transversal could be nearly identical. So many of the special effects, basic character builds, and the spells could just transfer from one game to the other with some minor tweaks here and there. The story arcs in Final Fantasy VI are plentiful, dealing with all kinds of moral quandaries: teenage pregnancy, chemical warfare, military dictatorship, PTSD. It's like the game peered into our future, or past, however you look at it. The real kicker, besides the incredible stories, was the depth of characters. There are 14 playable characters in Final Fantasy VI. It made choosing parties more important, and also allowed for parts of the game where you could switch off between multiple parties and multiple players, letting you feel the gamut of characters. Unfortunately, Square Enix said that it would take nearly 20 years to make that game, and they still need 4 more years to finish Final Fantasy VII Part 3. So I just have one thing to say to Square Enix: get crackin'. I know I say this about nearly every game I play, but Knights of the Old Republic is one of my all-time favorites. The game took place 4,000 years before the movies, so it allowed the writing team to make their own worlds while building foundations for the Star Wars lore. In my opinion, these games had more enticing stories than most of the recent movies. And it is not a shock that Disney is working on a TV series focused on that time period in the Star Wars canon. But I digress. The fact that the game takes place so long before the movies allows all that happens to be surrounded by a cloud of mystery, and gives the game more leeway. For instance, the character that you control in Knights of the Old Republic is very important in the Star Wars canon. I won't go too far into it, but the character eventually becomes either a Jedi savior or a Sith master. Since the events took place 4,000 years before Luke Skywalker came along, it wouldn't be 100% clear what happened. Just think about Christopher Columbus. For a while in America, he was looked upon as a hero, but after unveiling a lot more history and what actually happened, this guy's kind of a dick and or schmuck. Time can really change perception. And just like Fable, Knights of the Old Republic has whispers around it talking about a remake or reboot sometime in the future. But it has been in development hell since 2021. The latest online trailer features Asper as the developer. Only they are no longer making the game. It is now in the hands of Saber Interactive. Now the bad news is that this is not coming out anytime soon. Embracer Group owns Saber Interactive, and if you don't know anything about them, that's probably for the best. Embracer Group is currently just buying up developers left and right to help their stocks look more appealing to investors, and they're not actually making many games. But the good news is that Saber Interactive worked on a game that I think Kodar should emulate, Witcher 3. Witcher 3 is an all-time great in the RPG world for many reasons, and Saber Interactive had a hand in the rebuild for the next generation consoles. In Witcher 3, the combat is expansive, and it allows a lot of different builds. The interaction with NPCs adds almost an additional game of quest to the journey. The world is massive. The stories interact with each other like an episode of Seinfeld, and the acting and supporting characters make this world fully immersive. The core of Knights of the Old Republic is a great game, so to make it really come alive in this generation, the remake needs to keep that interactive world feel that the original and Witcher 3 have. The combat could also use the more methodical approach of Witcher 3. Just replace Geralt's spells with Jedi or Sith powers, and change his weapons from a sword and a crossbow to a lightsaber and a blaster. Knights of the Old Republic needs to stay true to the original with the stories, but the graphics and the combat need a fresh coat of paint badly. Almost all mainline RPGs are done with turn-based combat, and I think Kodar needs to follow suit. But one thing is for certain, finish the damn game! And the last game that needs an update is March Madness. I love sports games, but they get stale fast. Not only that, but the companies making them find a decent formula and just copy and paste that game with a different year until the market no longer wants that game. March Madness is a game that should have been brought back before NCAA football. 2010 was the beginning of the end for NCAA sports games as lawsuits started to pile up. It's crazy. The players whose likeness were used for the games wanted money for using them. But that was a bridge too far for the multi-billion-dollar corporation EA Sports and their partners in crime, the NCAA. But now that an agreement has been reached, EA Sports and the NCAA can again exploit student-athletes in order to bolster their bottom lines. Now let's get to it. EA Sports has not made a decent basketball game in over a decade. As much as it pains me to say, 2K would have to take over. The gameplay in the NBA 2K series is smooth, intuitive, fast-paced, and a lot of fun to play. But let's remember that 2K was set to release College Hoops 2K10 before this whole fiasco started, but let's ignore that because March Madness has a better ring to it. The 2K March Madness game needs to focus on the coaching point of view. I know everyone wants the career mode crap, but I have to tell you, as a lifelong sports gamer, those modes suck. When you play a career mode, you have to hope your teammates throw you the ball, or that you even get in the game. If you miss a shot because, you are new to the game, or if you built your character wrong, you will never see the ball in your career. That's not fun. The game needs to focus on the team play aspect, and the coach is the one who deals with that. The gameplay between the lines can be identical to NBA 2K, but the player interactions need to be front and center. Much like Allen Iverson, I don't want to talk about practice, but how your players respond to playing time, team rules, coach discipline, campus atmosphere, homesickness, GPAs, and other off-court issues that might arise. Your coach ultimately has a lot of power with decisions, and that can affect what happens to your players. Maybe your player hurt themselves in practice, and your trainer asks if you want to try a new method of treatment. It might not be NCAA sanctioned, so that allows a lot of gameplay and choices to be made. Maybe your team is struggling in the classroom, so you need to get tutors. but then they don't have enough time to practice. There is a giant balancing act in coaching college sports, and that could really make a decent basketball game become a great one. In addition, allow players to create their own schools, and dare I say, try to bring in NCAA Division II and III. I know it sounds expensive, but more kids go to Division II and III schools than Division I. They are buying these games, so adding more divisions would expand the base instantly. In conclusion, the NCAA basketball tournament is one of the most watched tournaments all year. Why not make a game that lets people immerse themselves in that? Please come back, NCAA March Madness.